and welcome. I am Neria Leva Gutierrez, and I'm Acting Executive Director of the Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance. We are so happy that you are here tonight for NoMAA hands-on workshop for artists and performers that focus on writing about your art today. As we all know, art today is so different from maybe what we would have imagined. And many of us are searching for meaning in our lives and in our work, and searching for words that might help us express what we are feeling and feeling deeply, actually. And so that's what we're here to do tonight. But before we begin, I'd like to thank the Department of Cultural Affairs and the New York State Council on the Arts for supporting this program. And we'd like to especially thanks Patricia Miranda, artist, curator, and educator, who will lead you tonight in examining best practices for talking about art and writing artist statements in every genre. You are in excellent and expert hands, and it's my great pleasure to turn the mic over to Patricia. Patricia.
Thank you, thank you. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to say beforehand, or okay? Just hi everyone. Really excited to see you, to see some familiar faces, some new faces. So I'm going to share my screen and just jump right in because I got a lot to share with you. And just make sure that everyone can see that all right. Great. Okay. So just to start, this is my contact information. I hope that you will connect with me, you know, follow me on Instagram, I'll follow you. Feel free to contact me, get in touch. I'm really love connecting with other artists and collaborating and kind of working together with other artists, and especially interested in working with, you know, the Uptown community. I want to thank Nidia and Joanna and Michelle for all their work and for inviting me, and NoMAA, such an awesome institution. I've been really honored to do these projects with all of you this spring, especially during this really hard time. The other thing is I'm going to, you know, you all are able to, after the workshop or as part of this workshop, can email me at info@patriciamiranda.com with your artist statements for some editing feedback, because obviously we can't get everyone's done tonight. We're going to do some exercises and stuff and talk a lot about artist statements, but you know, feel free to email me. And also, just setting my timer here because otherwise I need to keep track of myself. And also, if you do send me an email and I don't respond within a few days, please email me again. Don't hesitate. Don't feel bad. Sometimes email, you know, is just a little crazy, and just know that I'm much prefer that you email me again. I will get back to you, but you know how email is. I don't know. So that's my contact information. I like to start with, I got to move you guys over so I can see my screen here. Oops, not letting me. I like to start, so one of the things that we were talking about in relationship to this particular workshop, which, you know, wanted to frame it just a little bit differently than maybe I normally would, although I think that this is not uncommon for me to take this kind of point of view, but to think about the times we've been living through. We're in the midst of a pandemic, which has, you know, affected people's health, their professional lives, their jobs, their communities, their so many levels. Has affected us financially and professionally. And then on top of that, we have the issues around equity and justice and violence with the police violence and protests. So there's just so much going on. And I think, you know, artists are citizens, right? We are part of this. We're not outside of these things. And I think sometimes it can be hard as an artist to think, you know, is this meaningful for me to be doing this during the midst of some, you know, all that's going on? Is this essential? Is this essential work? And I just want to, I just want you to remember that artists are stewards of the imagination, that art is really essential. It is the place where we reflect on our culture, where we rage against our culture, where we find respite from it, where we examine the beauty, the joy, the anguish of our culture, and where we share it and where we get active. And it's really essential. So the definition of hope is the ability to imagine something that doesn't exist, right? And that's imagination. Imagination and hope are really connected. And that's what artists do. We imagine things that don't exist yet. And that's really, really essential. And so whatever kind of work you make, whether that work is abstract or polemic or didactic or meditative, all of it is part of this rich landscape of human culture, and all of it is necessary. So I feel like it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. So one of the really useful things that we can do as artists in terms of our development is think this way, is to understand that your work is always situated in the larger conversations. Art is part of it's always situated in the social, right? It's not outside of the world. It is bigger than you, it is bigger than your media, it is bigger than your genre. And there are conversations around all of these. There's material conversations, there's style conversations and genre conversations and conceptual ones and political ones. They're all around your artwork all the time. So one of the things that you can think about is if you think of your artwork as a conversation, and then think about the kinds of conversations the artwork is having, this can be a really powerful way to help think about the lineage of artists who've come before you, the artists around you, and also where your work might be moving in the future. And then just in relationship to writing and thinking about these in relationship to what we're going to talk about tonight, when you think this way and think about the different conversations that your artwork is a part of, it can help to inspire you to kind of bring your work up to its greatest potential, to see the larger ideas more clearly, and also to see, where your work is really meant to go. Like, where is the work that where is the place where your work is meant to go to do its work, right? It's work that's separate from you. We as artists our work is not us, and the work has a job to do on its own, right? It has work to do out in the world. So this kind of exercise that we're going to be doing tonight is kind of a part of that larger conversation. And I always love to show this image of the cellist of Sarajevo. This is an image from the siege of Sarajevo, devastating war with snipers and everything else. And he was a cellist in the orchestra, and there were 22 people that were killed, and he went and played his cello, and he put on a tuxedo, so really formal, like as an act of art, and went out and played in the midst of all of this violence. And people said, how can you do that? It's so dangerous. And he said, if I don't have my humanity, then I don't care about living. So art really does matter, and it's a powerful way for us to kind of think about, to reflect upon, to imagine change, and to bring hope to all of the kinds of situations that are going on. So keep that in mind. And so these are some of the questions that I ask. And for me as an educator and as an artist myself, I made a commitment a long time ago that everything I would do as an artist and as a teacher would be seen through an ethical lens, as much as I am capable of doing in my own very human way. And so we're going to think about how we speak and write effectively about our work today. We're not going to talk about the issues of the day, but we're going to talk about how does one craft language around our work? How do we consider and be responsible to the ethics of our content and the way we communicate? Language really matters, as we know. And art is a language. And so we're going to think about language and how we use language in service of our work, to make our work better and to also to communicate to people about our work, right? And then the last sort of sentence, I just have to close this because it won't let me do it. Whoops, sorry. Sorry, that last, I can't seem to turn the things off, so I can't see my screen clearly, but the last sentence is really something I think about a lot. And I think in today's world of so much uncertainty, this is a question that artists are going to be asking. I know we've always asked, but it is also a question that is even more urgent today. And I think a question that NoMAA is part of, right? How can we be a community of artists? What can we do as a community of artists, both for our work, to support one another, and to support the ideas and things that we care about in the world? So that is not what we're going to talk about tonight, but for me, it's always the lens through which I look at things. So if you're interested in that last question and you want to kind of talk to me about it, I love to talk about it. So let's gather and do that. So let's get into it now. So I like to start with a little bit of humor, because artists are really, I've been teaching artists in undergrad, graduate, professional artists for over 15 years, editing artist statements and working with them. And it is, for whatever reason, one of the most fraught things that artists encounter is writing about their work. It's really hard, right? It's hard to step outside the work and to write about it. And so I just thought I would show this. I was teaching a this was a professional artist. And, you know, artists are like, oh, if I wanted to be a writer, if I wanted to write about my work, I would have been a writer. If I could tell you how many times, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said that to me, I'd be a wealthy woman. The reality is that we have to be able to communicate and articulate about our work. It's just the reality. So I'm sort of very pragmatic. I like to have strategies to develop ways to do this. And so she sent me this. I put that blue square over the expletive in there because this is a public thing, but this is what she sent me when this was her artist statement. She eventually did write one, but this was her first reaction. So I'm very familiar with this, this reaction. But I want to kind of demystify the artist statement for you, right? This is really important. Why is it not? There we go. An artist statement is a concrete descriptive document. It is nothing more than that. It is nothing less than that. It is really, really, if you can simplify it and break it down, it can be really helpful. So it's an introductory text, provides contextual background for your work, it provides some insight, and it helps people to understand what they are looking at. This is really important because people are not always familiar with form. They may not know about the media you're using or the language you're using or the materials or the ideas. And also 90%, 99% of people are going to encounter your work digitally. And the digital is always going to privilege certain kinds of images, right? And so if your work has like texture or if it's very subtle colors or all sorts of things, then the text that you have is like an addendum. It helps people to understand what they're looking at, right? And that is true when someone looks at something in person, and it's also true digitally. So artist statements are no longer than one page, 250 to 300 words. You will very often have to write 100-word artist statements, which initially are super hard to do, especially if you're wordy like me. That's really hard. You may have one statement. You know, if you're a landscape painter and your work is about light and color and plein air painting, then maybe your statement is fairly consistent over time. But you may be someone who works, like I do a lot of project-based work, so I might have a different statement for different projects. Maybe you do performance, and each performance has its own kind of thesis statement. And so you might, and you also might, you know, your work, we don't stay the same. Our work changes over time. And so you might be writing statements, you know, you write statements fairly often. Sad to say, sorry to let you know, but you might have one that's somewhat consistent, and then you might have an overarching statement and then individual statements for individual projects. Artist statements are written in the first person. Bios are written in the third. There's sometimes a little overlap between them, but that's the kind of, that's the sort of rule. Now, one of the things I think that's really helpful to think about when you're writing an artist statement is to think that the artist statement is about the work. It's not about you. Okay, I'm going to say that again. It's about the work. It's not about you. And what that does is it kind of takes us a little bit out of the equation and helps us to write a more sophisticated or more successful art. It takes into account a lot of these different ideas. However, you're not going to find all of these things in every artist statement, right? These are just a sample of some of the things. And by the way, I'll have a PDF of this presentation, so you'll have like a working document that you can use to do the exercises that I'm going to talk about later. So these are some of the things. Now in some people's work, you know, one might be larger and someone else might not have any of them, right? So these are just some of the things that you're taking into account when you are writing about the work. So you will talk about, the text should relate to the visuals, right? In other words, if I read an artist statement and then I look at the visuals and I'm like, I don't really understand how these two are related, then that's a problem, right? Remember, the text is an addendum to the work. It doesn't replace the work, it doesn't explain the work, but it helps me to have more insight into what I'm looking at, right? So almost every artist statement will have some information about materials and processes, right? Techniques. If your work is particularly technical, then, or it's, you know, hard to see what it is, or it's a mysterious thing, something that's really interesting, like my work, for example, I use a lot of natural dyes and pigments in my work. They are not just a means to an end, they are actually really integral to the content. So it's really important that I say something about that, right? Now, it's not a technical document. So if you do work in a technical field, like you're doing printmaking or encaustic or weaving, something that has a lot of processes and steps, this is not the time, this is not a how-to document, right? What you want is to give people a sense of what it is, what the materials are and how you use them, what are the processes. Now, if you're an oil painter and you're working on canvas, you probably don't need to say much more than that, right? Like we don't need to know that you use Gamblin medium number 247, right? If you're doing something that's more unusual, like you're using unusual materials, then it's important to really talk about them a lot. Oil painting is very familiar, most people know it, so there's not a need, unless you're doing something pretty unusual with it, for you to say much more, but you always should say what it is. I'm also not a huge fan of when people use the term mixed media, because I don't know what that is, right? So when I'm looking at images and it says mixed media, and I'm looking digitally especially, it's really hard for me to tell what that is. So I really, and this is like in the artist statement, but also in like when you're identifying materials, to really list the materials. Now, if you use found objects, then you can say found objects, but really kind of to be very clear and concise. Remember, it's a concrete descriptive document. When the person reads that document and then looks at their work, they should have a better understanding of what you make, of what they're looking at, and they should hear an individual voice. One of the things, like a lot of these things are sort of the things that I've seen over and over and over and over again in artist statements. So if your artist statement has some of the things I'm talking about, believe me, mine did too. Everybody's does, right? We all, this is a journey, right? So don't worry. But these are the things that come up again and again. They're really common. So if there's an artist statement and I could take your artist statement and apply it to 10 other artists in a minute, then clearly that is not descriptive enough of a document, right? It's too generic. So you got to get more descriptive. And also, artists are often telling people what to think. And I'm going to talk about that quite a bit. So just keep that in mind. It's something to not do, right? So an artist statement is not a biography. It's not a description of the obvious, like the oil painting. You want to say that it's oil paint, but we don't need to go into great detail about it. A polemical speech, a work of creative fiction. Your art is the fiction, right? This is a document to articulate ideas about it. It's not a fiction in and of itself. And it's not, once again, you'll see this show up again and again, it's not a prescription for how people should feel. Now, if your work is very political, then a polemical speech might be actually quite right. So Kara Walker, her last solo exhibition, I think it was 2018, she had an artist statement that was like a polemical speech. It's fantastic. It's really a work of art in and of itself. And I have a copy at the end here. I don't know if we'll have time, but I can email it to you. Anyway, it makes perfect sense because when you read the document and you look at her work, those two things are congruent, right? They belong together. They make sense. If your work is autobiographical, if you're making paintings about narratives from your family, if you are a performer, performers very often are using their bodies, right? So there might be more biographical information in their artist statement. But if your work is not, like, first thing you should say is, where is that biography in the work? Not in me, in the work. If it's in the work, then it'll be in the statement. Okay, this is really important. This is like a really, really big one. And some of this is just really good writing. Like we have to be much tougher in our writing to get these statements to really be great. So I want to talk about descriptive versus conclusionary language, right? Artist statements and project proposals are descriptive documents. So I want to make a very clear distinction between conclusionary and descriptive language. And I'm putting project proposals in there also because they are often extended artist statements if you're applying for a grant or if you're making a proposal for an exhibition or a performance or an event of some kind. You very often have to have a little bit more of an extensive document. Sometimes they're combined or sometimes they're separated in the proposal, right? An artist statement and the proposal. But the project proposal is going to follow these same rules of being descriptive. Okay, so what does this mean, conclusionary? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? It draws conclusions, but it's amazing how hard this is. I do a whole kind of class on this and it's really difficult for us, right? But conclusionary is didactic. It tells meaning. So if I use this sentence as an example, this apple is delicious. Now that sounds great. We're all like, yeah, hey, I'm on board with that. However, if you really read this, if you parse this language down, and I'm a big fan of parsing the language down, let's analyze it and see what it really says. This sentence actually says nothing about the apple, right? Other than that it exists. And this is a crucial distinction. If I hated apples, or I was allergic to apples, or I came from another planet and never heard of an apple, I actually have zero information about the apple. What I do have a lot of information about is the person who the apple belongs to and their feelings about the apple, right? So this is a banal example, but I think it really makes it very clear. So there's nothing wrong with that. If we're with our friends in the park and they say this apple is delicious, it's just fine. But for an artist statement, it's really a conclusionary statement rather than a descriptive. So if I say, this apple is crisp and fresh and sweet. Now suddenly I have a lot of information about this apple. So even if I never heard of an apple, or I'm allergic to apples, or I hate apples, I have some really concrete observational information. Crisp and fresh and sweet are facts, right? They are observations. This is the difference, right? A descriptive document is observational. It's what you can see. Now, obviously you can't see ideas. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, you know, and how you talk about that a little bit more later, but I want you to begin to think about the language in this way. So rather than telling me that it's delicious, I can say, wow, crisp and fresh and sweet. That sounds like it might be delicious. In other words, I'm drawing my own conclusions. The thing you don't want to do with your work is to tell people how they should feel, to tell the people how they should interpret. You want to kind of lay out the parameters of the work, lay out the parameters of the experience, and allow the viewer to have their own conclusions, draw their own conclusions. Because of course, some people are going to think the apple is terrible, and some people are going to think the apple is great. Okay, so some of the basics in terms of language. Avoid self-indulgence. Now, I don't mean that we intend to be self-indulgent. However, remember, an artist statement is a short document. It's only one page. Think of it as like Madison Avenue, Upper East Side, real estate, right? Like every word is a $5 million, I don't know, condo, townhouse. It's not my, it's outside of the parameters of my reality, but do you know what I mean? Very expensive real estate. Every word has to count. And so if you start, and every like little thing will show up really clearly. Like if you start every sentence with I, it will show up, and it starts to sound like you're talking about you instead of talking about the work. Remember, the statement is about the work. It's not about you. Don't use a $5 word when a $3 word is just as good, right? Artist statements are not specialized documents. They're not academic documents. Now, again, there'll be exceptions to everything that I say, right? If your work is extremely conceptual and academic, then in your artist statement, you might be chock full of $5 words, right? And I'm not saying don't use $5 words. It's just that it's really obvious when someone is kind of filling a statement with a lot of big words to sound, you know, like to make it sound smart. So use the word that really states what you're trying to say, and think about what the words actually mean. Language really matters. I mean, I know we know that, and I think right now is a time where that's even more powerfully present for us, and it counts in your artist statement too. So I think I refer to them as like big tent words and small tent words. So a big tent word is something that is really generic, right? Beautiful, exciting, like those words are so overused and also so subjective. Like we're trying to get away from subjective language and trying to get to objective language. Now we never can be totally objective, but that's a philosophical debate for another lecture. But beautiful and exciting are really big tent words, right? You could fit almost anything under those, right? It's very subjective. You and I could sit in a room and I could tell you all the things that I think are beautiful, and you could tell me all the things that you think are beautiful, and we would have a big long category of very different things. The other big tent words are category words. Like people use terms like colorful and texture in their artist statements all the time. These are not actually descriptive, right? In other words, everything in the world has color. Everything in the world has texture. They're categories. It's not a description. The difference between neon green and pale mauve is enormous, right? Very, very different. Yes, they're both colors, but they're really, really different. And texture too. Is it smooth? Is it crunchy? Is it nutty? I mean, there are a lot. So texture is a category, colorful is a category. So use small tent words. This is a really powerful one. As soon as you start using smaller tent words, you're going to immediately just have better statements. We all use the big tent words, so it's just a practice, right? It's just a practice. So the tone should be expressive of your work again. So you should write as though you were speaking about what you do, just a little bit more formally, right? So it can be all of these things. It can be funny, it can be political, it can be reserved, it can be academic, it can be colloquial, it can be, as long as when I look at the work and I read that statement, I don't go, what does this thing have to do with that thing, right? They should feel congruent. I should feel like I look at this, I look at the work, I read the statement, I come back to the work and I go, wow, okay, I see. I see much more. It gives me deeper insight into the work. The like one is a little bit of a pet peeve for me there, I think, maybe. I think of like as a comparative word, like I use, this is like that, but people use it all the time as a list word. In other words, I use materials like you know, pens and papers and this. I prefer such as. Now, technically, that's not it's not grammatically incorrect. I checked. I'm a bit of a grammar nerd. You know, it's not wrong to say I use this, you know, things like this and this and this, but in again, a short declarative document, these small things can really help to make this document much sort of cleaner, more concrete, and more sophisticated. I don't know if sophisticated is not the right word, but just a tighter statement. So you're going to write in the present tense, right? The present tense is active. Passive tense is past tense, and lots of things like that. So you're going to use declarative statements. Now, artists are really modest people, right? We're really modest people. And it's hard for us to use declarative sense. They sound really blunt when we start using them. But I want you to just trust that, you know, if you do it a few times, you will begin to get used to it. So in other words, if you say, I wanted to create a possible atmosphere of, I can't tell you how many times I hear the things like this. I aim to, I hope to, I want to, I desire to. Instead of I create an atmosphere, right? My work presents an atmosphere. It's short, declarative, it's active, it's present tense, it's not passive language. So I have that like in two things. Okay. You always want to review for your grammatical errors and have someone else proofread because you can't proofread your own, and don't trust your proofreading with Word because it can't tell the difference between T-H-E-R-E or T-H-E-I-R, stuff like that, right? And you won't notice it when you've read your statement 500 times, which you will. You won't notice those things. So give it to someone else to spell check. So other basic things to think about. Avoid these things in an artist statement. Contractions. Don't, can't, won't, shouldn't, wouldn't, couldn't. Contractions are negatives, like but, however, maybe, sometimes. I should have those together. They're negatives. In other words, if you say I don't, I can't, I won't, it means you're talking about something that you don't do, right? Remember the real estate? Remember the $5 million a word? You don't want to waste time in your artist statement about what you don't do, right? So avoid the contractions. They inevitably are negatives. The other negatives are but, however, maybe, sometimes. I see them a lot. Like, I do this, however, I also do that. Artists often say to me, but Patricia, if I say that I do, you know, X, Y, Z, people won't know that I also do, you know, M-A-B. And I'm like, you know what? I always say, if I say I like broccoli, it doesn't mean I don't like cauliflower, right? Like people, if you give people examples, they will understand that you do more than just that, right? So think of the broccoli metaphor. So don't say sometimes I do this, because it's like sometimes I do this, sometimes I do that. It starts to sound equivocal. It sounds like it's weak language, right? ING words, anything that ends in ING, again, it's a passive voice as opposed to an active voice. There's nothing wrong with ING words, but we're not writing novels, we're writing statements. ING words, also gerunds. A gerund is an ING word or a verb that acts like a noun. So avoid gerunds. Most people are like, gerunds? I didn't even know what a gerund was. So I kind of get excited about gerunds because it's such a weird thing. But it's when you turn a verb into a noun. So swimming is fun. In that sentence, swimming is acting as a noun. So don't avoid gerunds. These are all things that are passive language. So there's nothing wrong with them grammatically, but they are passive language. And the artist statement should be present tense active. This is a huge one. This is a really huge one. And I think bringing the ethical lens back in, this is really incredibly important. We often say in our artist statements, I'm including myself and many, many, many of my other artist community, who will say, use the word we. I would just want to say, anytime you find the word we in your artist statement, go back and look again. See if you can find another way. And we can talk about that, and I can help you think about that. The we is a way of universalizing. In other words, when you say we, who are you referring to? What is this? Who is this we you're talking about? Is it a, you know, a white woman living in Washington Heights? Is it a 10-year-old Bangladeshi girl? Is it a Maori person in New Zealand, right? Who is the we? And so try not to use the word we. It universalizes, it embeds a lot of assumptions in it. And it's assumptive language. It's universalizing language. It's essentializing and universalizing language. And so it's not that I don't believe that there is a human condition, but I cannot tell you how many times I read artist statements that want to communicate about the human condition. But I'm always like, what human, right? So try and rephrase. Again, bring it back to yourself, right? Bring it back to yourself. Speaking from that, think of like the greatest artwork you've you've read or seen or been an audience to that's about someone completely different from you, right? The way that art is an act of empathy. Stepping into an art space is an empathy space, right? I walk into, when you show me your work, I get to see the world through your eyes. It's the deepest act of empathy. And it's incredibly powerful. And that means that I can step into the worldview of someone who is entirely different from me, right? Different time period, different age, different ethnicity, different race, and I can empathize. But I won't, but that is through the specificity of that experience, right? Not through the universalizing of that experience, but through the specificity. If you want to read a fantastic article by Judith Butler, she talks about difference, our acknowledging of how we impress upon each other our differences. And if we thought of that as the commonality, then we would have a really entirely different way of dealing with a lot of the issues of the world. So when you're writing your artist statement, really situate it from the perspective of what you are doing, right? And this again goes back to telling readers what to think and what to feel and all of that. And I have to say, like, if I read one more artist statement that says, I'm going to feel peaceful, like instantly when I read that, my work will, I want the viewer to feel peaceful. I'm instantly pissed off. Like, it just makes me crazy, right? So don't tell people how they should experience it, but tell them what it's about. If it's meditative, talk about the color, talk about the meditative qualities. Don't talk about how the viewer should experience it. So writing the statements is really crucial. You can get help and feedback, and I've worked with artists quite a lot on writing artist statements, but it's really important to write your own statement because it really helps you to, it's really crucial and really helpful to help you understand and push your work forward. I've seen this happen again and again when working on artist statements with artists, that kind of parsing that language down, and really it's like a carving. It's like you have a big lump and you carve it away, you carve away all the sort of extra stuff, and you get to the heart of the matter. Good statements get to the heart of the matter. And so doing that for yourself is really powerful and important. So get people to read the statement for like proofreading. Am I making sense? Is this, does anything sound odd, or et cetera, et cetera. But I can't tell you how powerful it can be when you, like, I've been with artists where we hone that statement down, 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 and they come away with a much deeper insight into their own work. And I haven't done it, right? I mean, when I help people write artist statements, I don't write them. I don't add information. I don't put words in their mouth. We just kind of, again, try and get to the heart of the matter, and to find what the work is really about and what that artist cares about. So we're gonna just do some examples of, I'm going to show you a few examples, and then we're going to do a couple exercises, and I want to have time for questions and everything else. I don't know, I'm having cursor issues here, but I'm going to see if I can just give me a second here, just trying to see I can't seem to get my cursor to move this over, and I don't know why. I don't know why it won't let me do it. Okay, I got to just work with it here. So these are statements from actual humans. These are from undergrad students. So there's no names to protect the innocent. And undergrad students, of course, are really at the beginning of their beginning to understand their work and write about it. So they have some particular issues, but they're really good because they illustrate some of the really clear things that are in. So I can't even see the chat. I wanted you guys to be able to chat, and I can't. All right, I'm going to stop it for just a second because I want to be able to put my cursor in there, and it's not letting me do it. So I'm just going to pause that for a second. I want to get it just so I can. Okay, let's see if this works better. Still can't see the cursor, but I can.
Patricia, if I can interrupt you for a brief moment.
Please.
I put in the chat, so please feel free to type in questions.
Yeah.
As they might come up, and at the end of the lecture presentation, Patricia will be answering questions.
Yeah.
So again, feel free to type in questions there.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to say that, and I wanted to be able to see them as we go, but for some reason I can't. I'm not able to access the chat here, so I'm sorry about that. If there's something that seems, Joanna, like, pertinent to bring in at the moment, then let me know, because I can't seem to access the chat. Okay, so let's read this. I'm going to read this. What I want you to do, and I was going to say do it in the chat, but I think we're going to have to just do it, unmute yourself and kind of chime in, since I can't seem to access the chat. That's really frustrating. I'm going to read this. I want you to kind of see if you can pick out some of the things in here that I've been talking about, right? Some of them will be really obvious to you. So while I'm reading it, see if you can write down some of the problems or some of the issues that I've discussed up till now. And I know I went through that pretty quickly, so I'm happy to, take questions after. I try to create an atmosphere of the unexpected so the viewer can experience the world in a new way. I aim to use color as a way to help show emotion and expression. My interest in texture is used as a contrasting design element. I hope to give the viewer a feeling of delight by looking. Okay, so does anybody want to kind of chime in on what some of the issues are in this statement? Just kind of, and I don't know if someone put something in the chat, Joanna, if you could.
Hi, that was me. I'm just, I will be able to unmute anyone who.
I'm sorry, I just can't see their
hand. Patricia, I'll take care of it for you.
Sorry. Frustrating. So there's some obvious things in this. If anybody wants to kind of either put it in the chat or to unmute and kind of just yell out what you think some of the issues in this statement are. Anybody?
Well, I see in the beginning it says, I try to create an atmosphere.
Exactly.
I think I can go by saying, I create an atmosphere of the unexpected. No, I create an atmosphere of the expected so the viewer can experience the world in their own ways.
Right. That's exactly.
I kind of stopped there.
Yeah, totally. In each sentence, you'll notice that the first sentence says, I try, the second one says, I aim, and the last one says, I hope, right? Those are all qualifiers. Right. If we just remove the qualifiers, you instantly have a stronger statement. There's some other things. Anybody want to kind of pick out some other things?
Well, Patricia, someone in the chat, Liza, has said that this person is telling the viewer what to experience.
Exactly. Huge one, right? I hope to give the viewer a feeling of delight by looking. Now, I don't know about you, but when someone says to me, I hope, you're going to have a feeling of delight, I'm instantly suspicious, right? So that's definitely a problem, right? That's telling the viewer what to, not what they're looking at, but what they should experience. Anything else?
And Autumn has said that there's really no specifics. What color or texture is she talking about?
Exactly. So texture, again, is a category, right? We don't know what kind of texture. We don't know if it's smooth texture or like gritty texture, or, we have no soft texture. We have no information. And the same for color, same for color, and the same for emotion and expression, right? Those are also categories. And emotion is a category of things. It's not a thing in and of itself, right? We have a whole plethora of emotions and expressions. So these are kind of, also, an atmosphere of the unexpected is really general. And so the viewer can experience the world in a new way, right? That's also telling us how we're going to experience it. So these are all problematic things. Now, this statement could probably apply to, like, I don't know, you could probably put this statement in front of a lot of artworks and it wouldn't be, it would fit, right? All right, so let's look at an edited version here. My work presents a sense of delight through the use of exaggerated neon greens, blues, and yellows. Thick impasto oil paint furthers a mood of abandon inspired by the Expressionists. Texture and color leap off the two-dimensional surface, inviting the viewer into a dialogue with paint. So instantly, we have like an enormous amount of information, and it's even a slightly shorter statement, right? I know a lot more. I have an idea of what kind of colors. I know that it's impasto oil paint, so it's textured, it's like thick oil paint. I have an idea of the artist's voice because I see them, there's a mood of abandon, they're like, I can see them painting, right? And now when they say texture and color, I have a reference point, right? I have the reference point of exaggerated neon greens, blues, and yellows, and the impasto oil paint. So we could probably work on this artist statement some more, but I feel like, do you see how much more content is embedded in this and how much less content is actually in here? A lot of words, less content. So we're really trying to parse it down.
Yeah. Patricia, if I can interrupt. So Daniela mentioned the difference really with the first and then the second, because it had I try, I aim, I hope, not decisive.
That's
Which I
exactly
thought was
right.
interesting
Thank
use of a verb, not decisive. And that's how it comes through.
Exactly.
The-
So
the
this one,
first
every
piece.
single sentence starts with I or my, right? It starts to sound like the artist is talking about themselves and not the work. So thank you. Yes, that's a huge one for, for this one. Thank you so much for getting that in there. All right, I'm gonna read this one too, and I want people to kind of to think about, to pull out the things that they see in here that are problematic. When I draw, I want to create a world that doesn't exist, where the viewer can enter and experience something fantastic. I am fascinated by places I imagine that exist only in my mind. I often use pen or pencil to begin a loose drawing, which I might paint with watercolor paint, or I might scan into the computer. I sometimes play around in Photoshop until I get the colors I want, creating the imaginative feeling I want the viewer to have. Again, a lot of words. I don't know how much content there is. So anybody want to jump in and either unmute yourself or type in there?
Hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Okay, Liza here. So I see that they're using a lot of I's, and they're also not specific about anything. Because I don't know what a loose drawing would look like. And yeah, they're indecisive about what they actually do. I sometimes do this, I imagine this, I am fascinated by this.
I know it's I mean, these are, you know, a little extreme, but it's, I mean, in the last sentence, there's 4 I's in that one sentence, right? I sometimes play around until I get the colors, creating that feeling I want to. So yeah, that's really problematic, right? So I actually don't have any information about what this person really makes, right? I have a little bit of information about they use pens and pencils and sometimes watercolor. So there are huge numbers of really generic things. Anything else? Anybody notes in here?
Autumn, Autumn, would you like to speak?
I think Aileen has a raised hand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel there's a lot of use of I want, I might, you know, those like indecisive sort of terms, but also there's a whole lot of explanation with very little value.
Exactly. So lots of like qualifiers. I sometimes, I might, I want to, I, you know, I hope to, I want the viewer to have, except for, and so those are just qualifiers. Just, you know, qualifiers, you just want to not have qualifiers. And it's amazing how many you'll find in your writing, but just get rid of them. And also, yes, it's a little in the weeds with the methods, right? So when I was talking about methods is really important, but like, I don't need a play-by-play. I don't need to know, you know, what's useful for the person to understand about your method and your technique, right? Anything else?
This is Eileen. I was just about to say that there is too much information on the actual process and that's specific in the wrong way and doesn't really add anything.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. It's like people are like, well, it's very specific, but it's not specific in a way that gives me any insight into what I'm looking at, right? The other thing that's in there, anybody want to throw in another thing before I?
Well, I was looking at the first sentence when it says, when I draw, I want to create a world that doesn't exist. And my mind was going back and forth, trying to really doesn't exist. I just couldn't visualize what that looks like. So what does, basically, what does that mean?
Exactly. You know, there's really no information. Like I look at this and I have absolutely no idea what this artist makes, right? I don't know anything about their work except that they use pens and pencils and etc.
And Daniela, did you speak?
And someone else, I think.
And I think we have Liza as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say about the last sentence where it says, I sometimes play around, creating the imaginative feeling I want the viewer to have. Like that there is more about creating something they want the viewer to experience, whereas creating something for the viewer to experience themselves.
Yeah, that's great. And also it's really generic, like imaginative feeling. I don't know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Like the first sentence, like, oh, Daniela, do you want to say something? I love that you guys are responding. It's great.
Oh yeah, thanks. Just the second sentence, I had just written in the chat that it doesn't really have much meaning because, as you said, all of our art exists in our mind before we bring it forth. So I just feel like making an opening statement in the first 2 sentences is so important. So I just feel like what the person says in the first sentence and the second sentence, we all imagine worlds that don't exist, and they exist in our mind till we bring them out. So I don't know, it doesn't really entice you.
Yeah, it's so generic, right? It's all
Too
big,
generic, yeah.
all big tent words. There's no small tent words in this entire maybe pen or pencil. That's a small tent word, right? But other than that, it's not. And yeah, it's amazing how we can, you know, this is like really great example of how you can use a lot of words and not really say very much, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, that what you said is so important. Like obviously you're creating a world that doesn't exist. That's the definition of art, right? And also when he says when they say I sometimes play around in Photoshop until I get the colors I want. I'm like, well, would you play around in Photoshop to get the colors you didn't want? You know, there's stuff like that that's very funny. Interestingly, I had used this example in some workshops, and people made an assumption, and I don't know about the gender of this writer. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to say about that, but it's also a really good example of how language that's seemingly neutral can be really gendered, right? Or it can be coded for lots of different things, right? So people that I was working with made assumptions that this was written by a woman. It actually was written by a male student. And I thought that was really interesting. And the reason that we had a really interesting conversation about how this language being gendered was really through this kind of equivocating language, this presumption that women are socialized to use equivocating language and passive language. And so I think that's really important, right? I think as artists, we want to be declarative and we want to kind of state our work. And every person that I asked made the assumption that this was a gendered female. It's really fascinating. Okay, so we're gonna.
Patricia, just one last comment from Autumn, telling the viewer what to feel, which is something that you mentioned, that you want to just be descriptive and let the viewer, the writer, the reader feel and imagine, and not kind of be instructive.
Exactly, and it happens in several places in this statement. Okay, so here's an edit. My imagination is filled with fantastic worlds of animals that fly into space, topsy-turvy buildings that morph into ships and sail away, people with giant hats reaching into the stars. Science fiction and historic fantasy interest me as I can go forward and backward in time, creating stories along the way. Starting with pencil and paper, the drawings are expanded in the digital realm. A new world comes alive, leaping from mind to page. I mean, so much information, right? Yeah, anybody want to jump in? Anybody want to
respond? Who hasn't spoken, feel free. There are a couple of quiet folks in the room. Please, we don't bite, I promise. Greg, you're one of them, I know. Long-time uptowner, please chime in. Takashi, Taisha, Lawrence. So just to name a few.
Yeah, chime in. I'll stop. But just to say, you can see how much information. Now I have a sense of the artist, right? Like I have a sense of they're working in, you know, they're creating fantastical worlds, but now I have a sense of what those worlds are. And this is one of the students that said to me, but Patricia, if I say, you know, we're animals that fly in topsy-turvy buildings, then people are going to think that's all that I make. And that's the broccoli metaphor, right? Just because I sound like broccoli doesn't mean I don't like cauliflower. We understand that this is a list of things and implies other things. I thought some of the stuff was very interesting about going forward and backward in time, creating stories along the way. There's something about method, but it's not, you know, it doesn't go too deep into it in a way that's not helpful. Okay, so one last one we're going to look at, and we're not going to edit this one. We're just going to look at it, and then I have a little task for you in this one. So So think about, we're going to just quickly go through the things that we've already gone through, which I think, and these are really obvious, obviously, in some of our statements that are not going to be as obvious as this, but I think making obvious examples can be helpful because it really clarifies the ideas that I'm talking about. I am interested in classical forms that are not completely realistic. I build figures that are based in story, but jump off that into my own version. I love to use clay for its fluidity and color. I make large armatures to begin, building clay on top until I have the shape I want. I then cast the form into resin. I'm trying to communicate a sense of what it means to be human. Anybody want to chime in about problems with this statement? Daniela.
Sure. It's actually kind of one of the problems that I have myself. I think it begins every sentence with I, but it's so hard to get away from that sometimes. But instead of just completely, trashing this, I have to save it. I think there's some good content in there, but literally every sentence begins with I, and it's just too much. It's every single sentence.
Yeah.
I agree. I feel like it's less declarative when it's just I, because they're kind of like hoping that you understand. Whereas when you use my work, you're letting them know that this is what you're doing, very decisive when you use my. When you're, again, me too, I have this problem with the I because I feel like I was explaining, but now I see what you mean where, no, you're explaining who you are, what your work is, not yourself. You know what I mean?
That's
and
right.
The I, when you don't use I, it explains the work and not yourself.
Right, so true. So if you're having issues with the I, because it is hard, I mean, you're like, it's my work. I'm talking about what I make. How can I not use I? It's really hard. So bring it back to the object, right? So if we go back to this one, he's going back to my imagination is filled, and then he's being really specific, describing the things, right? Describing the objects. So very often I think sit in your studio, sit in amongst your work while you're writing, right? And just look around and observe. So the I's in here are really problematic. I mean, it's very common in undergrad because, they're young people and they're sort of, it's a maturity thing too, but I see it in professional artists statements too, a lot. So you might, switch it around. So any other things in here that are problematic?
Well, there's a lot of obviously it's passive, right? But there's I love to use clay rather than, there's got to be a better way to say that, you know what I mean? It sounds so it's not about that you love to use it.
That's right.
Or yeah,
sorry. And it's important, I think that some of that language, it's not that I never want people to use terms like love in their artist statements, because I think, we need more love, but I think using it in, obviously you love to use this materials or you wouldn't be using them, right? So that's something that we can presume. You chose those materials. One of the ways that I switch this around, if you're thinking about this, is instead of asking why, why I use this, well, I use it because I love it. Ask what. What is it about the material that attracts you? What is it about the material that you can't stop thinking about? What is it about the material that, calls you back again and again and again? Or the imagery, or the, the subject, all of the things. Ask what, not why. The reason is there's technically nothing wrong with the question why, right? But we live in a very over-psychologized culture. And so why always takes us back to when I was 5, I fell out of a tree and now I paint trees. It's very reductive. It's not really doesn't really take into consideration the kind of mysterious reasons we make the things that we make. And it's not helpful. It's really, it takes it to the psychology of the making rather than the materials are, I'm fascinated because of this and this and this. So in this statement, there's lots of things. There's the I, there's I'm just going to go through just for time. I'm interested in classical forms that are not completely realistic. I don't even know what that means. What kind of classical forms? And not completely realistic, I don't even know what that means. It's very, when you really parse that down, it doesn't say very much. And I build figures that are based in story, but jump off that into my own version. I don't know whose version it was otherwise, but it's your version, right? Also, figures are always narrative, right? Whenever you have a figurative thing, there's a narrative. So there's just sort of things about that. Now, there is one phrase in this statement that I, in working with the student, I call it a nugget, right? I call it the nugget. So there's a nugget in here, and it's the nugget that I would build the statement on. Can anybody pull out the nugget? that kind of answers the kinds of things that we've been talking about.
Is it the last sentence? I'm trying to communicate a sense of what it means to be human.
No, I mean, that's more of the royal we, right? That we talked about. That's problematic because I'm like, you're trying to communicate a sense of what it means to be what human. Do you know what I mean? Anytime you do that, just like, you know, watch the we language, right? Just, it's not that it's bad to talk about like things we have in common, but you want to do it not using we language. Anybody else? Yes?
Well, the artist, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I build figures that are based in story, but jump off into color into my own version.
Well, I feel like that doesn't really say very much. Now, let me say that we read things because we're smart, right? We're intelligent humans. We can kind of extrapolate this, but if you really parse that down, it doesn't really say very much, right? Look for something that's really concrete and descriptive.
The artist is saying, I make large armatures to begin building clay on top until I have the shape I want.
Yeah, that's closer. It's a little bit in the
sort of. Okay.
A little bit in the weeds, right? There's another nugget.
So Noelle has shared the fluidity and color description.
There you go, Noelle, you got it. It's not the color because that's generic, right? Remember, that's a category word, not a descriptive word. Fluidity, that's a descriptive word. I use clay for its fluidity. That's the nugget. So when you're writing, you're going to write and you're going to go back and you're going to find the nuggets, right? So that's the nugget. Fluidity, it's very descriptive. It's factual, right? It's like clay, it has a fluidity. It's something that the artist is attracted to. It's the reason they use it. So that's the nugget in this statement. It doesn't mean I would throw every single other thing out, obviously, but we would rephrase everything. I wouldn't change fluidity. It's a really good, concrete, descriptive word.
Patricia, if I may,
Yeah.
backtracking a little bit, Taisha had a good point of how do we guide the viewer, but without guiding them. So her question, Taisha, do you want to give your question a couple of comments before?
Well, I was confused where, you know, you keep saying don't, you know, telling the viewer what to feel, but it's our work. Aren't we guiding the viewer into our psyche, into what the work is about? Like, ask the what and not why. So how would art guides the viewer. You're having a conversation with the other person. So why wouldn't I be able to tell them what I want them to feel? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I know. This is like the space where it's hard, right? So I'm going to try and give you some concrete like exercises to begin to think about it. So if you think of your objects not as things, but as opportunities for an experience, what you are doing as an artist is you're setting up the parameters for the experience. The viewer has their own experience, and what we're doing is setting up the parameters. So let's talk about, why is it not letting me? I'm just, such crazy things, it's not letting me advance here now. There we go. Okay. Do we have time to do this? I'm going to come back to this.
Another 10 minutes and then last kind of Q&A.
8:15, what time do we have? Oh, it's 8 o'clock already. All right, I'm going to skip over this. I'm sorry. Just, I'm going to give you some, all right, we're going to do this. Okay, so this is the exercise you're going to do. The elevator pitch is basically, you have 30 seconds. You meet someone in an elevator. You have 30 seconds to tell them something about your work. And if we were in the room together, we would do it together and we would have a conversation about that. It's a little hard to do it here, so we're gonna skip over it. But the reason it's 30 seconds is like you have to think on the fly, you have to think quick, and you have to like do something really concise. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna do an exercise. You're gonna write 7 words that describe your work, okay? This is a very classic exercise for beginning to write artist statements. Remember, think small tent, not big tent. Think descriptive, not conclusionary. So imagine, now we're just gonna do this really quick right now. You're gonna have about 30 seconds or so to write 7 words. You can write more words and kind of parse back. But imagine you're sitting in your studio or you're surrounded by your work, and maybe you are right now. Look around and describe what you see. Describe what you see. Describe the things that you care about in the work, right? That's a good start. Okay, 7 words. Everybody ready? And what I wanted you to do is to type them into the chat. Unfortunately, I can't see the chat, but we're going to type them into the chat. We're going to save the chat so I can comment on it after. All right, ready? And Go. I think I'll give you a minute rather than 30 seconds, a little bit more time. Oh, I just accessed the chat. Okay, that's, oh, wait, no, another few seconds. Okay, stop. It's good to do these quickly because it helps to, and I can see the chat, but now it's in front of my screen. Great, great words. It's good to do it quickly because you kind of think off the cuff. You don't think too hard about it. These are ways to just get started, right? To just get started. I'm seeing some great words in here. I'm seeing some big words too, like colorful. That's right. That's a category word, not a descriptive word. Diaristic, very descriptive. Social justice, very descriptive. Whimsical, very descriptive. Nature, maybe that's a little bit of a big tent word, but it's a good one. Great, these are great. Dense, that's a good one. Layered is good, but you probably could find maybe a little bit more specific. Matte pigment. So the idea with the 7 words is you don't use any grammar. You don't write sentences. Matte pigments, that's good. Smooth surface. Serene. So serene is a little bit of a conclusionary word. Maybe you can find something that describes like something in the work that you interpret as serene, like, you know, pale blue color or something like that. Bold, enigmatic. So bold, and those are kind of, I'd say they're medium tent words, right? Medium tent words. Cheerful, lighthearted, good. 3-dimensional, really good. You know, that one's really good because you would be amazed at how often people don't say sometimes the most obvious thing, right? Like that they're making something 3-dimensional. Exuberant is a good one. Watery, good. These are great. Great start. Keep them coming. I'm going to keep going just because we have time. So this is, you're going to have my, oh, I got to move the chat. It's really hard when you can't see the, so the thing that I recommend is that you do a free associative writing exercise, right? And I'm going to try and close this so I can see. Don't think too much. Don't worry about edit. Like try and think of small tent words, but don't stress it. Don't think too hard about it. Just free associate, right? Free associate. Write more than you need. I always say write 500 words because what happens when we edit is we tend to edit the interesting stuff out and leave the more banal stuff in because we're very modest and it sounds nice, right? Oh, scribbly, that's a great one. Tiny tent word, right? Scribbly is great. So write the 500 words. You want more than you need because you want to be able to pull the nuggets out. Let's see if I can close this. Oh, God. I can't. So these are some of the questions that you're going to consider when you're doing your 500. Now, I'm not one, I'm more like what works for me is to do really free associative, to read this and then put it away and to write really free associative. But if you're sort of more like really, you like real structure and all of that, then you could actually answer these questions, but do it free associatively, right? And then pull from those sentences, from these questions, some of the nuggets that you can use in your statement. And again, you're gonna get this document so you'll have these statements. And then, I can't see this. Sorry, I'm trying to.
Patricia, real quick. So what difference is there between coming up with words and then associate ideas? how do you see them as connected?
Yeah, I'm trying to move this over. Okay, so the 7 words, that's an exercise that you start with, right? That's to find some nugget words. Then you do your 500, word free associative, right? You're gonna go back to the 500 word and you're gonna associate ideas. So what that means is, and I found this step-by-step exercise to be really, really effective. After you've done the 500, like the 7 is to get you start thinking about small tent words. Then do your 500, go into the 500. Now you're not editing, you're not like trying to change the words, you're not doing any of that. You're just going to associate ideas. What we tend to do is to talk a little bit about media, to talk a little bit about subject, to talk a little bit about technique, and to mix it all up. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna just clump together all of the sentences about media or method or technique, all of the sentences about concept, ideas, all of the sentences about subject matter, whatever. Usually, the 2 big ones are media, obviously, and concept, right? But you might have other things in there too. So just lump them together, lump them together. The next step is to, sorry, I'm just having technical issues here. Sorry, bear with me, I apologize for this.
Okay, as we begin to wrap up, please type in your last question. And again, feel free to reach out to Patricia directly with your artist statement. And as she mentioned at the beginning of our workshop, she is happy to work with you one-on-one on how to tweak it and really give it the voice that you want it to have. Quick question from Sir Nike. Sir, are you with us? Do you want to ask Patricia the question?
Sure, yeah. Can you recommend like learning resources around this topic, even for like artist statements, proposals, bios, and so on?
There's a lot of resources out there, and you're going to get this document, and I can make up a resource list. This step-by-step is really helpful, and there's also some, yeah, I'll put together some resources. I apologize for my technical issues here. It's really frustrating, but if I just quickly do this, then you go through and eliminate your redundancies. I mean, this is really the end.
Thank you so much.
Then you check your language, right? Then you start to go through and find the passive language, the qualifiers and everything else. And then, and only then, do you begin to edit for concept and clarity. So you've done a lot of the hard work paring back to the really essential kind of important stuff. You've pared away a lot of the other stuff, and you come to the place where you really get to the kind of heart of the matter. So yes, any other last minute questions?
So Liza has a question. Liza?
Thank you guys for your patience.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just thinking, so do we do an artist statement for just one time thing, or is it a statement for each different project, depending if the project is very different than, you know, the initial?
Yeah, so every artist is different. So there are some artists who are going to have one statement for pretty much their entire body of work, right? There's going to be other artists that work project-based, right? So you might have, maybe you work in different media, and they're really different. Maybe your work is project-based. So I have artist statements for different projects. So I might write a different statement for each body of work, right? Then if you're working on a proposal for a grant or an exhibition or something like that, you might write a specific statement for that, right? For that body. In other words, you're going to put together a group of works to submit. And so you're going to write a statement that that is an addendum to that body of work.
Okay.
There's no one way, right? It's going to depend on the kind of work that you do. Again, if someone is a landscape painter, they might have one statement that kind of pretty much covers almost everything they do. But someone else might have different kinds of projects that are really different from one another, and they might have different statements for each one.
Okay, thank you.
And I think Autumn has the last question.
Yeah, you sort of just answered it. You know, I was just, like, if you work in a wide range of media, like not one unit more than the other, I was wondering, like, how would you go about distilling that down? Because I know, yes, like if I like apples, that doesn't mean I don't like oranges, but.
Right.
But
I would say that for people who have a diverse practice, and that I include myself in that, like I've worked that's very project-based and might be quite different. I have a kind of an overarching statement that talks about ideas and some of the methodologies, and then I'll often have a statement that's project-specific, right? So there's not really one way. And also it's going to be tailored to the situation. So like on your website, you're going to have statement that's a general statement and then maybe project statements. But when you're writing proposals, you write a statement that is completely tailored to that proposal. Really, really important.
Thank you, Patricia. So a couple of quick announcements. Folks, you have a survey on your screen. Please complete it. It helps us to plan ahead and also for our funders. Even though this program is free, it's not really free. So as Nidia mentioned, we want to thank the Department of Cultural Affairs, our 2 local council members who have sponsored for several years the Uptown Arts Stroll, Idanis Rodriguez and Mark Levine, and NISCA as well. So please write your comments. The last screen in Patricia's presentation workshop, there's her email, so please take it down as well. You will also get an email within the next 24 hours with the presentation and the survey. So if the survey is causing technical glitches, don't fret, you will get a way to give us feedback. A couple of quick announcements. Census 2020, very, very important. If you have not completed it, please do so. You can do it online. It takes a few minutes on the phone or via email. And also we will have our next virtual open studios this coming Thursday, July 2nd, with local Inglewood photographer, Emmanuel Abreu. So please join us at 7:30. And I think that's a wrap unless there are any last minute questions, thoughts, concerns.
Thank you all so much. And please do email me. I'm happy to chat with you about these ideas further, and I'll make a PDF of this so you can actually follow the exercise to kind of answer some of the concerns and the hard parts about writing these statements. They're not easy, but they're really, when you can get the really good one, they can be really rewarding and helpful in articulating your work and also in getting you opportunities, right? So.
Thank you, Patricia. And a quick reminder, as mentioned at the introduction of tonight's workshop, it is being recorded. So if you feel you missed something, you want to rewatch it, you want to share it with someone, please feel free to do so. Again, thank you, Patricia, for such a wealth of knowledge. Thank you, Michelle, for all of the back-end technical and all of the moral support. And Nidia, of course, as our acting executive director. So I think that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you.